It is time to finally conquer that tower. So today I'm going to just give you a quick overview first of some general tips that you might want to take into tower with you, and then I'm going to go through every single one of the hardest tower floors between 31 and 55 and tell you exactly how to actually beat all of these different fights, including some low rarity strats and some low investment strategies with like basically the fewest amount of strong characters that I could get away with and still beat these fights. So the first tip overall that I would give is, since the tower has originally released, they've added the Crystallis system. And the Crystallis system allows you to make your characters a lot more strong than they otherwise would be. So for example, one of the best Crystallis that I can tell you about is the one called either Focus Guard or Indomitable Guard, which are the Crystallis that give you damage reduction to the entire party based on how few or how many enemies there are. And as far as tower is concerned, the one that gives you damage reduction based on how many enemies there are can be quite helpful on a lot of these different floors that you're trying to battle through. The other one is, of course, generally a lot of places in this tower will require you to do a lot of damage, and it will be your attacker that does most of the damage, and Ren sometimes. And Crystallis are able to give you a lot of damage for your damage dealers, so you probably want to make sure that you actually have the Crystallis for that damage dealer, which in most cases will be attack percent, will be elemental damage percent, will be weakness percent, will be their EX Crystallis depending on if it's good or not. Those kinds of Crystallis, they also want crit substats. And also there are other Crystallis that are very helpful, like the ones that give you more MP or they give you more speed. Those can help you a lot in this tower. Generally, also another tip, if you have a 5-star defender who is at least Ascension 4, you've basically won the game already, because an A4 defender who is 5-star, for example, a Kirika or a Sayaka or a Sana, who are at least Ascension 4, give you so much damage reduction to the entire team just passively, and if they then also have one of those Guard Crystallis that give you even more damage reduction, you're taking a lot less damage, and you'll be able to just have that character alone keep the entire party alive in most cases, unless the fight is going terribly. But that you're basically always going to use a defender like that if you have one. Next up, if you are struggling generally, you should definitely make sure to bring characters that are of the correct element that the enemies are. Because if you match element to what the enemies have, you not only deal bonus damage, you also don't get your damage reduced by resistances, you also take less damage, and it will be more likely to inflict status ailments. So overall, it just gives you a lot of bonuses for being off the correct element and makes you survive a lot longer. And therefore, yes, you definitely want to make sure that you actually have as many characters be off the correct element as the enemies as you can. And then generally another thing that people have already figured out, of course, yes, many characters that buff speed are really good. This is, for example, your Mami, especially at Ascension 2 and higher. This is your Muemura, but also Rika and Riko, which both also buff speed, although by a lesser amount, and they need to build up their buffs first. Generally, I can give you a list of characters that is somewhat pretty good for this tower, but I want to mention that if you don't have a speed buffer, or you still feel like you don't have enough speed on all of your characters, now with the Crystallis system, you can just re-roll your substats on all of your characters' Crystallis until you have +3 or +4 speed on all of your Crystallis, which gives you so much speed. It's as if you had a speed buffer like a Muemura on your team. The action advance is a different thing, but at least as far as the speed buff is concerned, you can almost make up for that just by having everyone have Crystallis that have speed on them as substat. So that is something to keep in mind, for that now you can actually make up for not having a speed buffer to some degree. Now if you have both, keep in mind that if you have like a 20% speed buff, that does not actually apply to the speed you get from Crystallis. That's a separate thing. Now I'm going to give you a list of generally great characters that, even if I don't mention them on any of the fights coming after this, these are just generally characters that if you have them, they'll probably do really good. They'll probably be doing really well. You can just use them and see what happens. These characters are Homura, cool Homura it is, Pluvia, Ren, Swimsuit Sayaka, Mami, A2 specifically, Mabayu, also if she's not A2 you can also use her still. So Mabayu, Muemura, Hazuki and Kirika. Those are probably going to be your all-star characters, where if you have these characters well built and they have good Crystallis, you can basically use them anywhere, and there's not going to be much to it. But now we're going to actually get started with our first battle right here, and this will be Tower 34. Now I'm going to not do the towers that end in 1, 2, or 3, or the ones that are like 6, 7, 8, those ones, like the in-between stages, because those are just some minion battles that aren't very powerful, and usually the minion battles get stronger and stronger until you get to the minion battle just before a boss. So for example, your towers that end in 4 or towers that end in 9, those are the ones that have like the toughest minion battles, and there are some absolute doozies in here. So those are going to be the ones that I'm going to be focusing on, because the minion battles that come before this are much easier, and you probably aren't going to have much trouble, especially if you play the strategy that I'm going to be telling you about for these minion floors. So Tower 34 is the first of those floors I'm going to talk about today that is kind of difficult. And this floor in particular can get really nasty really fast. So you have enemies on the far sides that don't really do that much by themselves, but you have an enemy in the center that can curse you. And the curse is kind of nasty because while it doesn't do that much damage itself, it actually makes the enemies, specifically the one on center left and center right, do a bunch more damage, and they generally can do a lot of damage if they decide to, for example, target the same character twice with a single target attack. And they also, and this is probably the most important part, those center left and center right enemies, those become extremely powerful if they drop below 30% HP. So if possible, you want to kill them from above 30% HP to immediately dead in a break. So if you break them, you want to make sure to actually kill them immediately, or if you cannot kill them in a single break, don't make them drop too low. Get them to maybe 50 to 40% and then break them again and then kill them afterwards. That's probably the best advice generally. However, these enemies do a lot of damage, and sometimes, depending on how the RNG of the fight goes, they can just decide to completely screw someone over, but we're going to try and help out against that. So generally, there is going to be high group damage. You can play double sustain, which is what I'm showing on screen, and generally the fights that I'm going to show you on screen, all these lineups that I'm using, I'm going to try and use as many powerful characters as possible. So my Sayaka, for example, is only an A0 defender, and she's also not of the correct element. Generally, I will be using Sayaka a lot because my other two defenders are both A4, so it wouldn't be fair if I use them. But my Sayaka is A0, and she doesn't have Chrysalis either, so she's basically a completely fresh Sayaka, fresh from the gacha, who has nothing. So that's going to be a good indication of a defender that isn't well built and has nothing. They also have a Lux Madoka. Yes, I'm using Lux Madoka as often as possible for any of these videos. I'm using Rera as a low rarity sustain. And then I have the Momoko, who is okay, but Momoko is generally one of the weaker attackers who is gonna do, who's at least A4, so she'll be able to do at least something. But most of this fight will be carried by Mabayu, because Mabayu turns out is really, really good. So my first piece of advice, if you have Mabayu, generally you should just use her, because Mabayu is really good. With Mabayu you can give double turns to even just a Lux, like Lux with double turns, really powerful. Lux plus attacker, also really powerful. But, and this is the one I want to point out for low rarity strats, Rera is actually kind of slept on sometimes, specifically for enemies that apply status ailments. So on this fight, because there's curses coming in and the curses make the enemy stronger, there's a really nice way of handling those curses on demand, which is having a Rera special. Because Rera, once she reaches A2, Ascension 2, I think can remove ailments just by using her special. So if you give Rera the MP percent portrait, which I think she doesn't have in this fight, but if you give her the MP percent portrait, she actually reaches her special in about 2 regular skills. So you can just give her a turn, and then maybe you can either use a Hazuki or a Mabayu to give her another turn after that, and she will be able to immediately get to special, and then she can just hang on to that special. She can just have it and not use it, and you just have it on you, and then whenever curses come in, you can instantly pop that special, and it instantly gets rid of the curses and also does some healing. And together with the actual defender keeping the damage low, the combination between that, both the on-demand ailment cleanse and on-demand emergency heal plus a defender keeping the damage low, that usually does a good job of keeping you alive. Now when it comes to actually breaking and dealing damage, you have on the other side, of course, Lux, your attacker, and your Mabayu. In this case, if you don't have Mabayu, like I said, Hazuki also is able to give characters more turns, but is much harder to use than a Mabayu, because Mabayu just gives someone the buff and they get a double turn, but with Hazuki you actually have to look at the action values on the left and have to make sure that you don't give a turn to a character that is already about to get a turn anyway, so it's much harder to play around with, but you can also still get a lot of extra turn with just a Hazuki. Also, generally, if you have a speed buffer, once again, Mami A2, Murmura also just get more turns, is able to break enemies faster, make your attacker do a lot more damage. And generally your goal is your 2 sustains are just there to keep you alive, and then you're just trying to break the enemies in such a way that you can actually kill them before they reach that 30% HP threshold on those 2 big enemies, because if they are below 30% HP and they're not in break, they will kill you immediately. It is a very quick and painful death if the big enemies are alive below 30% HP and they're not in break, so that is the main goal of this fight. But once these enemies go down, once the center one goes down, you can't get cursed anymore. Once the enemies on left and right goes down, you can't get damaged anymore, and it will just be a victory after that. Now, some characters that I want to point out as being basically the best characters for this would be Homura, Momoko, Oreko, Holy Mami, Pluvia, Tsukuyo, Mabayu, Hazuki, Felicia, Tsuruno, Reira, and Kirika. Basically just characters that are off the correct element, and for example, as far as attackers go, have some proximity or AoE in there, or have some other way of hitting multiple enemies, like both Pluvia and Tsukuyo, for example. Really good choices here. Next up, we have the first of the, like, I would say the hardest fights of the entire tower so far. Sadly, between 31 and 40 are some really powerful fights, and after that it actually gets a little bit easier, but this is somewhat of a place that you're just gonna have to get past, sadly. So we have Artist Switch right here. First off, you start the fight with 2 ads. So we look at this and we see an ad on the left and an ad on the right. Now, this part at the very beginning is somewhat interesting because you see on the very left that an ad is about to get a turn. This ad will immediately dispel all your buffs, so there's no reason to actually do anything that gives you buffs, so you actually want to not use any buffs immediately and just probably get some skill points, get some MP or anything like that. But what happens now? So this is how this fight is going to go. The boss is going to summon more ads, and the boss is going to continue summoning more ads as the fight continues. The boss also becomes stronger the more ads are on the field currently, and the ads themselves are pretty nasty. They can kill you very fast and do a lot of damage. And right now there's 3 ads, meaning right now we need to get rid of these ads immediately as fast as possible. And this is the hardest part of this entire fight, is this first turn right here. And it is very easy to die even with a good setup if you just get unlucky and the enemies decide to attack the same character multiple times. And generally what the ads themselves do in detail doesn't really matter that much. The important part is they need to die as fast as possible. So in this setup, I've actually kicked out my Sayaka, and instead I have a Rika here because I need more firepower. Basically, this is the idea. So in this fight, don't go double sustain. If you go double sustain, you probably don't have enough firepower to actually kill the ads. You need to be greedy. You need to have a lineup that is very greedy about the amount of damage that you deal, because you need to be able to deal a crap ton of burst damage very quickly. And double sustain setups just don't have enough firepower. So I don't have a Sayaka instead. I'm only using a Reira to keep my entire party alive. But I have my Rika to actually give more MP, and a Mabayu to give bonus turns sometimes to Reira, although not that often, to help out. If I had a Hazuki instead, you had a Hazuki instead of a Mabayu to also help out with the healing, because you can give more turns to Reira. But also, I will have that either Hazuki or Mabayu give more turns to my breaker. In this case, it's Lux. If you have Pluvia, much easier, of course. But you can also use speed buffers instead. So if you don't have Mabayu, you can also, or you don't want to use Hazuki, you can maybe if you have an Mami, even A0, you can use her. If you have a Momura, of course, absolutely perfect, stuff like that. You can also use them instead of Rika. Like, you can, I'm going to give you a list of good characters, so you can just pick and choose from them for the most part. But generally the idea is, and this is probably the more important part, the idea is, as soon as this fight starts and we get to this point right here, we want to kill these ads as fast as possible. So in this case, with the strategy that I've chosen, where the only like high investment character I have is Mabayu, not even high investment. I don't even think she has good crystals at all. She's only Ascension 1. But the point is, my Mabayu is going to try her best to give bonus turns to my Lux Madoka, to give her as many turns as possible. So my Lux Madoka, yes, it's a Lux Madoka, the worst character in the game, a lot of people say, is going to be able to break all of these ads quickly enough. At least. And like I said, if you have a Pluvia, you probably don't even need a Mabayu or someone to give bonus turns, because Pluvia just breaks fast enough. But we're going to try and set up these ads for a break with our breaker, and the important part right now at this point is, I'm seeing that I'm about to break these enemies. And when these enemies break, my attacker needs to actually be ready to kill these enemies, which is why I'm going to actually give some more turns to my attacker and give some buffs to my attacker in a bit. We have my special here from Mabayu. I think Rika also gave a buff over to her, and now that the enemy is broken specifically, I'm gonna break the rest of all the characters. I'm building up the break percentage, And the enemy is gonna get more turns soon. And this is not really good, because the boss gets more damage the more enemies are alive. So I'm gonna try and maybe kill at least 1 or 2 enemies here as much as I can. We actually get a bonus turn here on our attacker, but I think I do not kill here. Yeah. So yeah, we didn't kill this enemy. It's fine. We only killed 1 enemy. But at least with just 2 enemies being alive, this turn doesn't hurt too much in this case. But the enemies are broken, and it takes a while for them to come out of break, so we have some time left over to actually finish them. And this part right here might take you a few resets to get to the point where you can actually kill the initial set of ads quickly enough. But you see, with just giving some bonus turns to Lux Madoka, we were already able to break them decently fast. And then as soon as we notice that we're about to break the enemies, we immediately put all our buffs on the attacker and have the breaker and the attacker go absolutely apeshit as hard as we can. And our Momoko didn't even do that much. She did like a single special and hit like once or twice. But that's basically about it. Like your attacker doesn't have to be super insane, at least for this first wave, because these enemies don't actually have that much HP. The initial 2 enemies that the boss spawns with don't have much HP, but the initial spawns, the additional spawns, I mean, that the boss does, which have the nightmare effect on them, those are a lot more powerful, and those do have more HP, and you probably want to focus them specifically a lot more. Specifically, if you have more single target characters, you probably want to focus on them specifically. And now we get to the second phase of this fight. If you've come to this part of the fight where there are no ads currently alive, here's the thing. Don't actually attack the boss that much. Right now, there's not actually much happening because the boss by itself, does basically not a whole lot. It does a little bit of damage, sure, but that damage doesn't actually matter that much. The important part is that you get everyone's special back up, that you get some skill points, and then when the next ad spawns, you immediately throw every single special that you have, every single skill point that you have, everything that you have, the entire kitchen sink gets thrown onto this ad immediately. So as soon as this ad spawns, it gets immediately broken instantly before it can do anything, with all of our specials, all of our attacks, anything, and then the attacker comes in. Hopefully the attacker also has their special ready, so they can immediately pop their special as well. And if you have an attacker, even if they don't have high ascensions, if they just are either fire, light, or dark, and they have good Crystallis on them, they should be able to just immediately kill that ad. Like if you have a Homoda, they should be trivial, I think, to kill this ad if you give the Homoda some Crystallis to help with the damage a little, and if you put some damage buffs, like even a Rika just giving some damage buffs, or a Hazuki giving some damage buffs, that should be enough to really put the hurt on that ad. So now, once again, the ad is dead, and now that the ad is dead, we're once again not actually spending that many resources. We're building MP, we're building skill points, we're just waiting. Because, like I said, the boss by itself does basically nothing, so we don't need to pop specials, we don't need to use our skills too much. We can actually just play it really slow and use a lot of normal attacks. We can just get some more MP right here, and we can just play it a bit slow. Maybe we can use some buffs here and there, but that's about it. But for the most part, you can see everyone is just biding their time. Maybe applying some, getting ready for the next ads. I think I'm getting ready here. But for the most part, just normal attacking, getting more skill points. Basic attack on the breaker as well for more skill points. Even more skill points. As well as everyone's special getting back up. We're just waiting. We really are just in waiting mode. And here comes the ad. And as soon as the ad comes, immediately special. Immediately pop the ad as fast as possible. Everything dumped onto the ad as soon as you can. Break it. Specials, everything. Absolute hatred towards that ad immediately. And this is basically everything you do now. You just play it slow against just the boss itself, and then when an ad comes in, bam, 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 you just smash the ad down as fast as you can. And that's basically how the cycle continues from here on. Now I specifically need a Rika to actually give MP to Momoko, because Momoko takes so much MP to use her special. It's really difficult for Momoko to get many specials, but I can somehow make it work. I have Momoko's EX Crystallis, by the way, which gives her a lot more MP. Very helpful, that one, to actually get more specials out. But you can see I'm getting bonus turns because she's A4, but I don't need them because the special is enough to kill them. And that's good. And the fight continues from here. We basically do this exact same rigmarole continuously. New ad spawns, immediately gets dunked on, and then at some point the boss just breaks. And as soon as the boss breaks, we just kill it, because the boss, once it's broken, takes so much damage that it just dies. And that's basically Tower 35, the Artist Witch. Now I'm going to give you a list of generally good characters you can use for this. You can of course use specifically Homoda. Homoda is great for this, cool Homoda. Momoko, specifically once she has her EX Crystallis, because she really needs the bonus MP from her Crystallis. You might even give her the 10% MP Crystallis as well, because she really needs that much MP. Then also really good is Madoka, Pluvia of course. Lux Madoka is actually also pretty decent if you have a Mabi or Hazuki, because you don't, as you can see, once you get past the initial first wave, you don't actually need much breaker power to immediately break all the other adds that come in if you have special ready. Also go to Tsukuyo, Mabayu, Mami specifically with A2, Moemura, Hazuki, Tsuruno, Rika, Reira, Kirika, even Doppel Iroha because you need more damage. Doppel Iroha specifically with EX gives you more damage actually. And as you can see, the heal requirement is actually very low after the initial wave. And the initial wave doesn't come down to sustain. The initial wave comes down to both a combination of RNG and how fast can you break and kill. Like the first wave is all about instant damage and instant break and kill, more so than it is about sustain. But like I said, RNG can screw you over sometimes. But yeah, that was it, the Artist Witch. Okay, so Tower 39 is sadly somewhat of a doozy and one of the harder ones in here. So you have a blue minion that stuns your team, but it has a really low chance of stunning, but the chance increases the longer the fight goes on. It can also buff the team, so you probably want to take that one out first. It also doesn't have that much HP. The green one also doesn't have that much HP, like the one without the Nightmare effect, but it also doesn't do that much. It can heal a little, I think, and it can, I think, apply a barrier maybe, but not to a big degree. Can reduce some of your buffs, but not by that much. The more important part is the red minions. So the red minions are really nasty. They give themselves and each other damage up buffs that make them do a lot of damage. And they also do more damage the longer the fight goes on. Meaning that after a while, if you have a low damage team, you will just die at some point, because they will just do so much more damage that you will just get shreked. Now, I have for this team specifically an A4 defender and otherwise just low rarity characters and a Yachio who's not actually going to be doing much. Just because I want to show off what actually happens if you do have an A4 defender. Because an A4 defender, specifically a Kirika, makes your team basically immortal, and nothing can really touch you that much. Like, yeah, you might take some damage here and there, but overall, your team is just gonna be fine. However, generally, this fight will be much easier if you have, I guess, something like a Tsukasa. I don't even think I put her on the list of best characters because she's kind of like her own thing. So if you have Tsukasa, she can kind of get rid of the enemy buffs once they buff themselves. But if you have Tsukasa, sure, you can do that. But let's talk about if you don't have a Tsukasa, because I know many people probably won't have her. So the problem with this fight is because it does so much damage the longer the fight goes on, you would have to do this fight very quickly. And to do the fight very quickly, you need an AoE breaker, which means you would need something like a Pluvia, which is already a decent amount of investment, because I know most people have a Pluvia, but I know that not everyone has a Pluvia. So you need something like a Pluvia. You could also use a Tsukuyo to break all the enemies immediately. Then you'd also need strong buffers, like a Mami, not A2, but just generally a Mami. Then you might want a Mumura for more turns. You might need some strong debuffs, like also Tsukasa, but also, for example, Ren, for example, Felicia when she gets to her special, even though that's not that great of an idea. Soon Tsutsaka, characters like that do good debuffs, but generally you kind of need a lot of everything. You also need a strong attacker, because once the adds are broken, they need to die very fast. And that's kind of the main problem with this fight, is that you need a lot of everything. A lot of breaking, you need a lot of buffs, you need decent sustain, you need decent attack. So it's not like there's just one character that is the silver bullet, except Tsukasa, because Tsukasa can remove enemy buffs, which removes their barrier, which removes their attack buff, because they will give themselves attack buffs, like the damage dealt up buff, and Tsukasa just removes that. You can, I guess, use a 3-star Hazuki or a 4-star Ayame. I haven't really tested it out yet, so I didn't put it on the list, but I guess you could also use that, and specifically if someone buffs themselves with attack up, like the damage dealt up, you could remove it with either the 3-star Hazuki or 4-star Ayame. But because it's multiple enemies, just removing it from one enemy is not actually gonna be that helpful. So overall, this fight kind of sucks, I'm gonna be honest, but generally the idea is break fast and kill fast. If you can kill at least one, even if you don't have AoE, if you can kill at least one of the nightmare minions, like one of these nightmare style minions, very, very fast, at least that would be a massive help, because that will like so much reduce the amount of damage that comes in if you can at least destroy one of them. But generally, break one of them and then do your best by pumping buffs onto your attacker, by pumping debuffs onto the enemy to get your attacker to immediately destroy the enemy. But also, as you can see in this video, if you have an A4 defender just makes everything very easy, and with A4 defender the enemies can't really touch you. But yeah, sadly there's not too much tips I can give you. I would really like to give you more specific tips, but there really isn't much. It's straight up just a check. Is your team strong enough? Yes or no? And if it isn't, Crystallis will help with more speed, with more output for your attacker, with better like group damage reduction if you have the guard against multiple enemies. But outside of that, it's mostly just a output check. I'm really sorry about that. But yeah, general characters, I didn't put all of them on here, but general characters that would be good here is Homura, Shimsutsayaka, Oriko, Madokami, Yachio, Pluvia, Tsukuyo, Iroha, Tsukasa, Reina, Mabayu, Hasuki, and Kirika. So those will probably be very helpful for you. And now I come to everyone's least favorite boss. It's Tower 40, who in my opinion is the hardest of every single one of these battles on here. So this one is kind of doozy. So how does this battle work? The boss itself doesn't really take any amount of break gauge depletion until you have killed 10 adds. And the boss only summons a grand total of 10 adds throughout the fight, so you have to kill all the adds before you can damage the boss. The boss starts with 2 adds. They are very weak, they break very fast, they die very fast, they don't really do anything, basically. But the problem more so comes in after the first 2 adds, because then you'll have 4 adds, and then after that you have another round of 4 adds. And there are 2 types of adds. The first type, which is the one that the boss also starts with, by the way, is the type that becomes weaker when they have debuffs on them and don't actually do that much themselves. They're trying to harass you a little bit, but yeah, they don't really do that much. And if they have at least 1 or 2 debuffs on them, they definitely don't do that much. They're kind of useless. The boss itself also is stronger if it has less debuffs on it. So you want more debuffs on the boss to weaken the boss. I think it does less damage with its attack if it has more debuffs on it. And I think it gains less action advance because it actually action advances itself sometimes, and the action advance is weakened if there's more debuffs on the boss. So if there's no debuffs on the boss gains turns very, very fast, and every single time the boss gains a turn, it actually gains a speed up. So if there's no debuffs on the boss, gains many turns. If it gains many turns, gets more speed, gets even more turns, gets even faster. So it gets out of control very, very fast if the boss is allowed to not have debuffs on it. Then we come to the second round, and this is where it starts getting a little bit dicey. So this second round of adds doesn't actually have that much HP, and the break bars aren't that long. So once again, these ones die somewhat fast. There's a new type of add within this one, and this one is one that is probably going to be the bane of your existence, because these are one that I think are on the far left and on the far right, and it's going to be that way on the wave after this as well. This new type of add has the ability to stun your entire team for a turn, which if it happens, which even if it stuns just 1 or 2 characters, is most likely a game over at that point. Like if you get stunned, you're dead, basically. So that's kind of nasty. So what can you do about that? Well, they only stun your team if they currently have a barrier on them while they use their stun attack. Otherwise, it cannot stun. So how do they get barrier? Well, the boss can give them barrier. And this is where it becomes even more nasty. So the boss can give itself and the entire team barrier, as you can see on screen right now. So once it gives everyone barrier, everyone's abilities become different. So the boss now is actually able to deal more damage because the boss has an ability that deals more damage if it has barrier currently. Oh, and then the adds, they can stun you now if they have barrier on them. Oh, that's really bad. So we need to make sure the enemy doesn't have barrier, otherwise we get absolutely destroyed. What ways are there of dealing with barrier? Well, you can, of course, damage the barrier. Getting rid of the boss's barrier is really difficult though, because the boss has a lot of damage reduction while it's not in break, and we're not going to be breaking the boss anytime soon, so we're not really able to get rid of the boss's barrier, meaning the boss will be able to do a lot of damage to us unless we specifically cleanse the boss's barrier. What else can we do then? Well, I guess if you don't have cleanse, the boss will just have barrier, and I guess you just have to deal with that, and you don't have to deal with the boss dealing crap tons of damage to you, and that's just your lot in life, I guess. And yeah, that kind of sucks, but if you can't cleanse the boss barrier directly, you just take a lot of damage, and that's it. Which isn't game over. Like, you can still do it, and you can still survive, especially if you have a really strong defender, but it will make the fight a lot harder. That said, what you cannot really play against is if the adds on the outside have barrier. So if the adds on the very far left and very far right, if they have barrier, they will stun your team. You really cannot deal with that. but of course they don't take reduced damage like the boss does, so you can break that barrier with some damage. What you can do, for example, is you can have a attacker, in this case my Oriko, could have special ready every time the boss uses barrier, and then I can just hold on to that special and only use the special when the boss actually uses barrier. So my Oriko would then immediately pop the barrier as soon as the barrier is applied, and that way I'm okay. The Oriko has to be decently strong for that, because the barrier is decently powerful, but if your Oriko has Crystallis, especially if they're good Crystallis, multiple Crystallis even, she's gonna be fine, right? With just a handful of Crystallis, she's gonna be fine. But if it's just a base A0 Oriko without Crystallis, you might be struggling quite a lot to actually break the barrier immediately. But that's at least one way of breaking the barrier immediately. And that is one strategy that you can use, where you specifically use Oriko's special to get rid of the enemy barrier. And yes, it doesn't break the boss's barrier, so you take a lot of damage, you need good sustain at that point, which you're gonna have to solo sustain this fight, because with 2 sustains you're dealing way too little damage. So you will need a solo sustain that can survive the boss attack with the boss having barrier, which is difficult but possible. But then at least you don't get stunned, and if you don't get stunned, you can at least control the adds and kill the adds after a while. You still need to kill it really, really fast though, because like I said, the boss gets faster the longer the fight goes on. So you also need to still keep killing the adds really, really fast. Especially this final wave needs to die really, really fast. So there's not a lot of wiggle room. It's a very tight battle that you have right here. On top of that, the adds, at least the inner adds, and the boss, they get weakened, or they have less bonus effects if they have more debuffs on them. So you also need debuffs on everyone. You can kind of see how you kind of need everything. Like the good sustain, you need to deal with the barriers, with either your attacker or cleansing them. You need really good breaking. You need to have debuffs on them. You kind of need everything. And this is what makes this fight so difficult, is that you really kind of need everything. Now here's the golden solution. This fight, this team doesn't actually need Pluvia. This team could also probably do this with a Lux Madoka. And the reason why is because I have Tsukasa. And the golden solution is just have a Tsukasa Lamau. Yeah, just have a Tsukasa Lamau. That's basically the solution. So if you have Tsukasa, guess what? Tsukasa's special applies debuffs to everyone and gets rid of everyone's buffs. So Tsukasa's special immediately dispels all barriers. Fight self, right? Tsukasa's skill applies 3 debuffs to the entire enemy team. Yeah, that's 3 debuffs right there. Now the boss is weak, now the adds are weak. The enemy can't do anything if you just have a Tsukasa. So yeah, if you just have a Tsukasa, the fight is trivial, right? Just have a Tsukasa, it's really that simple, right? And you just keep her special. Like right now, my Tsukasa just has a special, you just hold on to it. You just hold on to it until the boss is using barrier, and then you can immediately, with the special, break the barrier, right? Okay, I know not everyone has Tsukasa. I know not many people have Tsukasa. That is like really not a solution for many people. So what else can we do? Well, keep in mind the boss, by the way, dispels ailments dispels debuffs off itself and off of the adds sometimes, so you will also need to keep reapplying debuffs sometimes. But if we don't have a Tsukasa, like I said, we can still do the strategy where we have an attacker just hold on to their special until the enemies get barrier and then immediately pop the barrier with special. That's a strategy you can do. Specifically, Oriko gets a lot of MP with her skill against multiple targets. Like against 5 targets, she only needs to use skill like twice, and she has another special. So she can actually get special very quickly, and she can actually have special every single time barrier comes up. So if you only use special for the barrier, you can actually do it that way. So you don't specifically need Tsukasa for that. Like I said, you still have to deal with the boss having barrier and doing more damage. Having an AoE breaker though is kind of important as well. Like I said, you can theoretically do it with Lux Madoka, but you probably need a Pluvia or a Tsukuyo. Tsukuyo also applies debuffs, by the way, so Tsukuyo is also really good for this, because Tsukuyo is an AoE breaker like Pluvia, who also applies debuffs, by the way, so perfect. So if you don't have Pluvia, and you don't have Tsukuyo, and you don't have Tsukasa, if you don't have any of these 3 characters, you might want to have to wait until you have at least one of these characters, because I don't actually know if it's possible without these 3 characters, without any of these 2 characters, unless you have an extremely powerful team otherwise, like an A4 defender, like Mami and Moemura, for example, or Mami and a Mabuyu, for example, or a Ren, for example, because Ren is also fantastic. Like you need generally really powerful characters, generally like an absurdly strong Homura, for example, who breaks shields with just her skill, for example, like my Homura actually does, which is why you won't see me using her, because it would be too easy. So you can theoretically still make it without any of these 3 characters, but for like regular free-to-play people who don't have jacked as fuck Homudas and Mami A5 or whatever, you kind of need to use Pluvia, Tsukuyo, and or Tsukasa. Otherwise, this is not really going anywhere, sadly. But at least once the ads are down, that the boss just doesn't really do anything, and the boss just dies. Like, the boss itself does absolutely nothing, basically, and it just doesn't really do anything. It's trivial at that point. But getting to that point, especially that final wave of ads, is extremely difficult. But I can give you at least an overview of some characters that can help you out a little bit. So the best characters to use are Homura, Oriko, Holy Mami as well, by the way, Pluvia, Tsukuyo, Mabayu, Hasuki, Ren, Tsukasa, Swim Sayaka, Kirika, and Double Iroha. Those might be helping you a lot. But like I said, don't worry about using double sustain or being defensive. You cannot be defensive on this fight. You need to go full on aggression as hard as you can to beat this fight. So I hope that I was able to help you at least a little bit with that. But yeah, AoE breaking, AoE damage, get rid of the barriers. That's basically the top 3 things you need to do. Good luck. From what was maybe the hardest floor of this entire tower, we come to maybe the easiest floor of the entire tower. Like, I have a Sayaka and a Ren here, but really you don't need them that much at all. So the idea in this battle is the enemies they do have really powerful attacks, but if they get hit with 3 either follow-up attacks or counter-attacks, they become a lot less powerful. But more importantly, they have really, really short break bars. So if you just have a Mito, for example, they break basically instantly. And I want to give a special shout out to Mito, who I think I'm using for most of the fights from here on. Mito is extremely powerful. So is Ashley, by the way. Don't sleep on your 4-star characters. I'm also using a 4-star attacker that doesn't really do much in this fight. But for the most part, these ads break so gosh damn fast that I don't really need to do anything. Yeah, I busted out my super powerful Ren, but the ads they're just broken and they just die really fast. So what you can do is you can actually just do Mito plus Ashley, so both Mito and Ashley, and then just have 2 sustains, like a Reira and a Yuma maybe, for example, have both of them on there, and I think the enemy can't even win, because they're just gonna be in break for most part, and yeah, they might do a lot of damage when they come out of break, but if you have 2 sustains, there's no way they're gonna kill you, especially if you have, like, let's say for example, even a Kokoro to give you a barrier on top of that with a Reira next to her. Like, this fight can't really do much against you, it just gets broken and dies. So yeah, just have Mito and Ashley, both of them on there, and trivial, absolutely trivial. So yeah, good luck with that. Although if you want an overview of good characters, I guess Ren, Ashley, Mito, Toka, Alina, Nemu, Sayaka, Kirika, those will help you. Okay, now the boss for this, the Commoner Source, is not quite as easy, sadly, as the floor before this, but here we have a fight that is very much predicated on having lots of follow-up attacks. So, I want to mention something very specific. If you have Ren at all, even if she's A0, use her for now for the rest of the tower. Like, even on Tower 44, on Tower 45, on 49, 50, 54, 55, every single one of these floors gets absolutely dunked on by Ren. So, if you have Ren, you basically use her now for the rest of the tower. If you don't have her, if you have Alina, also use Alina from now on for the rest of the tower, because all of these tower floors that are coming up, they're all void weak, they're all have mechanics where hitting them many times or weakening them is extremely effective. And both Ren and Alina, they both hit many times, they both do follow-up attacks, and they both weaken enemies, so both these characters absolutely goated for the entire rest of the tower from here on out, so I want to mention that. Now this fight is somewhat interesting. You have the center boss, and then you have a bunch of ads. And all of both the boss and the ads get weaker if they take follow-up attack damage, which includes counterattacks, by the way, which means Sayaka also can contribute. And the idea is, if you have enough follow-up attacks, like for example with a Ren, you can kind of just ignore actually killing the ads, because the ads are decently tanky actually. Because if the ads take follow-up attack damage, they're actually rather weak. They don't actually deal much damage at all if they have taken a bunch of follow-up attacks. And Aina, for example, as well, Ashley also has a follow-up attack, by the way, if she breaks an enemy. So if an enemy gets broken, Ashley has a follow-up attack, weakens the enemies, and if you break them one after another, because you can't get more than one follow-up attack per any character's turn, if you break one enemy after another, you can get multiple of Ashley's follow-up attacks one after another, as I'm doing right here. Like, I'm not breaking all of the enemies at once, I'm breaking one after another. So my Ashley gets a lot of follow-up attacks, and every single one of those follow-up attacks weakens the enemy, and the enemies are basically on 0 of their stacks, as you can see. Because they all have like the stack number that goes up to 3, or the boss has one that goes up to 10. That is how many, that's the power of their abilities basically, and it goes down whenever they get hit with follow-up attacks. So you can see that number being either at 0 or close to 0 for all of the ads. And when that number is 0 for the ads, they do basically nothing. They're basically just cheering the boss on, but otherwise are just cheerlead. Yeah, they're just cheerleaders once their stacks are at 0. So once their stacks are at 0, just ignore them, and we're just gonna focus mostly on the boss. And we're just gonna try to kill the boss after that, and just act like the ads don't even exist after that. Because from now on, my Ashley follow-up attacks are just going to keep those stacks at 0. So Ashley is really good here for doing that. And yeah, then we just go on the boss as if the ads didn't exist. Now the boss has something else that we need to watch out for. The boss has an ability where once it gets to low HP, or just generally the lower HP it has, it actually becomes more powerful. So if possible, we want to kill it in a single break, except it has really high amounts of HP, and I didn't bring an attacker. I just didn't. So if you didn't bring a good attacker, or if you don't have really high DPS, then you can't kill the boss in a single break. And if you can't kill the boss in a single break, then you will notice that the boss will do a crap ton of damage to you once it gets to really low HP. So you should really watch out for that, and if possible, kill it from maybe like 30-40%. Don't like have the boss come out of break at like 10% HP. That would be terrible. But the boss isn't in break for very long, and it has a very low break bonus, so it isn't very easy to do a lot of damage against it. But like I said, the ads don't do anything basically once they don't have any stacks on them anymore. They do refresh their stacks sometimes, but even then you can just immediately go back and break them again, or have Ashley follow-up attacks, or Alina follow-up attacks, for example, if you have her, also do really well here, and push them right back down to 0 again. So it might get very dicey once the boss gets to low HP, but this team doesn't do much damage. If you had better DPS, better breakers, for example, I would be able to do a lot more damage, and then the boss wouldn't be quite as dicey. Let me put it that way. So here are some characters that will help you in this fight generally. So as any follow-up attack characters and any character that fits the elements, which is, for example, Ren, it's Ashley, it's Mito, it's Toka, it's Alina, it's Nemu, it's Sayaka, it's Kirika. Those will help you out generally. I put Kirika in here because the boss gets out of break really fast, but if you slow the boss down with Kirika, of course the boss doesn't come out of break that fast, and that will help out quite a bit. But yeah, that's generally a selection you can do here. Sadly, there aren't that many attackers that fit that well here, because there's no void attacker, and with grass you have swimsuit Mami, and that's about it. But I guess you can also use one of the fire attackers like Momoko or Kyoko, for example. Kyoko has trouble because the boss doesn't actually get that high in break multipliers, so that's kind of sad. But Momoko might be able to do something against the boss here and also cleave the ads a little, so I didn't put her in the list, but yeah, I guess Momoko would also be good here. But that's generally what you want to do here. So here we have another floor that can be somewhat difficult if you don't really play towards the mechanics well enough, and the boss after this can also be somewhat difficult if you don't exploit the mechanics well enough. So the mechanics in this fight and the one after this are basically, these enemies are basically charging up a super special attack, a super duper attack. And the way that this is like made mechanically in the game is they will have a turn where they just do a single attack. That's a very weak attack that doesn't do basically anything. And then after that, they have a turn where they do 2 attacks. One of that is a weak attack, just like the other turn, but the other one will be like a super duper attack. And that super duper attack will be extremely devastating, but it gets weakened depending on how many stacks they have. So you see, for example, the enemies, they have this number next to their HP bar that goes up from 0 to 15. And if that reaches 15 and they do their super big special attack, it actually becomes really, really weak. But after they do their special attack, that counter then drops down to 0 and they start charging up again, and they're trying to then do another super special attack 2 turns later. So you basically always have 2 turns to get the stack counter to 15, and then their super special attack does basically nothing. And how do you get this counter up? Well, by just dealing damage to them. Every time they get attacked, they get 1 stack, meaning area of effect damage that hits all enemies, or follow-up attacks that hits all enemies. Like once again, Ashley absolutely goated here. Shout out to Ashley. Is really well here because every time she does a follow-up attack, she hits every single enemy. So that is able to give enemies a lot of stacks. And this is your goal basically. Get all of them to 15 stacks every 2 turns. Because then when their big 2 turn comes up, and you see it on the left of the screen, this enemy that I'm targeting has a double turn coming up, which means one of them will be that big charge attack. So I know that I have until then to get this guy to 15 stacks. So I'm going to break him, which of course gives me more time to do that. and then I'm able to put more stacks on the guy. I'm basically playing this fight not to do damage specifically, like the damage doesn't matter that much. More specifically, I'm trying as best as I can to always get every single one of these enemies to 15 stacks before they do their double turn. One thing to keep in mind is the big nightmare enemies, or the small nightmare enemies rather, that have 15 stacks. Those ones, they will do an attack that actually hurts you and damages you with their 15 stacks. And the nurse on the outside actually does a buff, and the buff becomes weaker if it has 15 stacks, so keep that in mind. The other two enemies, the small dude that doesn't have stacks and the blue nurse, they have really low HP and they die very fast, but they do a bunch of like buffs and debuffs and stuff like that. Not really that important. The blue nurse would probably just die due to AoE damage at some point. But yeah, I guess the buffs that the blue nurse does aren't the buff that the blue nurse does aren't very nice. So do kill her eventually, please. But generally, don't worry too much. It's more important to make sure that all of the adds are 15 stacks. And now this is the big attack. And you see light damage L to all damage count down. So this basically just means the more stacks it has, the less damage it does. And you see it still does about 2000 damage to everyone, which is a really high amount of damage. But if you don't weaken it, it does like 4500, which is extremely high damage. But with it doing 2000, we can actually tank that. Even if I had a Kokoro, like a 4-star Kokoro, I think also is able to tank this with shield. Meaning that even though we only have a defender, and like I said, this is a A0 defender that doesn't have Crystallis, so this is basically a fresh gacha defender that I have with Sayaka here, is still able to tank this damage. And now the ad is back down to 0 stacks, and it's trying to build up stacks again, or rather, we're trying to build up stacks again on the ad, so that next time this ad gets a double turn, we're able to weaken its big special attack. So once again, we're doing as much AoE damage as possible to get everyone's stacks back up. I'm taking it a little bit slowly here because the other two ads already have full stacks, so I don't need to go super duper hog wild on these. I can just wait for them to do their special attack and then do more AoE damage to get their stacks back up. So I also see my defender is coming up, so my defender is able to give me another shield. And with that, the next big super duper attack that comes in from the other ad, I have full shields. The ad has 15 stacks. It's not gonna do anything. It doesn't even break the shield. We're fine. We're absolutely fine. We don't even lose our shield to this. Great. And then once again, add back down to 0 stacks, and we're now trying to do our best to get these stacks back up. And now the ad is trying to buff. This attack up right here is really big, but it is much weaker the more stacks the ads had. It had 15 stacks. This attack buff is basically nothing, and the ads still do no damage after this. Really good. So once you can control the stacks and you make sure they never get their big attack on low stacks, they don't really do that much, but you have to have that sort of control. My Oriko, for example, doesn't do much damage, but it's okay. She doesn't need to do damage. My Oriko is not here to deal damage. My Oriko is here because she does AoE damage. That's literally the only reason why she's here, because she does AoE damage with her skill. That's literally it. And we have, of course, Mito and Ashley. They're both breaking really fast. They both do a lot of AoE damage, hitting many opponents. Ashley, with her follow-up attacks, keeps hitting every single opponent all the time. Just have as much AoE and proximity damage as possible so that you can keep hitting the enemies as fast as you can. Now, I did bring a Moemura, and the reason I did bring a Moemura is because if you don't have enough AoE damage, or generally the ads take too many turns, then it might become a lot more difficult to keep the ads on high stacks. So a speed buffer helps a lot with that. I could also just give everyone speed Crystallis, because with speed Crystallis, of course, I don't have to worry about a speed buffer. I could have a Kirika to slow the enemies, for example. But if you don't slow the enemies, if you don't have speed Crystallis, the enemies might take turns too fast, and in that case, something like a Moemura, like a Mami, or a Rika or Riko, by the way, either of those two also help out a lot, giving you more speed. And because both Rika and Riko give team-wide speed, in case you guys don't know that yet, that can help you out a little bit, specifically on top of having speed Crystallis, to make sure you actually get enough turns before the ads overwhelm you. But yeah, if you notice that you're not getting enough turns and the ads are getting their turns too quickly, try and invest into more speed Crystallis or bring a speed buffer if you can. That will help out a lot in this fight. And generally, some characters you might want to use here are, we have Oriko, Marokami, Pluvia, Alina, Ashley, Mito, Ren, Tsukasa, Mami, Moemura, Mabayu, Hasuki, Sayaka, Kirika. And like I said, you could theoretically also use Rika and Riko in some cases if you really need that speed buff. Okay, now here comes Tower 50, which is another one that can be very difficult, but it's not difficult for the reasons that you might think it is. Basically, we have a very similar mechanic than what we just had, where the enemies are building up for their super duper big mega attack, and you can see that they get more stacks if we attack them, and their big super duper attack gets weakened if they are at full stacks. So you can see that with the 2 ads on the side, they're basically doing the same thing. Now, because we start on 3 enemies instead of 5 enemies, we can actually use proximity damage instead of pure AoE damage to hit all enemies and keep their stacks low. Once again, like I said, Ren absolutely dunks on this, because just having Ren apply wound to the boss is an instant victory basically in most cases. There's not much the boss can really do out of that, as long as the rest of the team actually plays their part. So what does the boss do though? Because the boss doesn't actually do the exact same thing the ads does with its stacks. The stacks on the boss work a bit differently. So the boss still receives stacks every time it takes damage from something, which, and by the way, multi-hit attacks like Swimsuit Mummy or Swimsuit Seka don't count as multiple attacks. They still only count as a single attack. Keep that in mind. So what do we do here? When the boss reaches full stacks, it actually increases the amount of break gauge depletion the boss takes, and that is what the boss stacks are for. So right now the boss takes basically no break gauge depletion. As you can see, my attacks do basically nothing to the break gauge, but the higher the stacks go, the more break gauge depletion I'm doing to the boss, and that is where this mechanic comes in. So for the ads, we're attacking the ads to weaken their attacks. For the boss, we're attacking the boss to make sure that we can actually break the boss at some point. And this is where it gets somewhat interesting, because the boss clears those stacks every 3 turns, which means you have to hit the boss 30 times within 3 of the boss's turns, which immediately brings to mind, oh, we can just slow the boss then. Yes, you can just slow the boss, which means the boss takes turns slower, which means you have more time to hit the boss more often. Awesome. Generally, you can have characters that hit often, like Ren, of course, dunks on them. Sayaka with counterattacks hits more often. Speed buffers, like I have a Rico and a Moe mode on my team just for speed. They're not here to like help me deal damage, they're here just for speed, nothing else. So I can get more turns and hit the boss more often. Generally, this team doesn't exist to deal damage. This team exists to hit often. That's the only thing I care about, hit often. Now, there are some wrenches that are being thrown into your gears to deal with this. Theoretically, the ads don't do anything if they are hit 15 times between their big attacks. So you can actually just ignore them. And I'm mostly ignoring the ads because I know I can get them to 15 stacks before they get a turn, specifically because of Ren, and then I don't have to worry about them. If I had other proximity attackers or just generally more proximity damage, that would also help a lot here. But I know I'm fine with getting to 15 stacks, they don't do anything. But then the boss actually summons more ads, which means then it becomes a full AoE scenario, and then it becomes somewhat more difficult to hit all of the ads 15 times between all of their 2 turns. So what I'm doing is I'm still focusing only on the boss, and I'm just killing these center ads. I'm using so much proximity damage that my proximity damage kills the ads, because if I kill the ads to the left and right of the boss, then when new ads come in, they will of course then move closer to the center, and then I'm still in a proximity environment, right? Like if the problem is there's too many ads, if you just kill just the center 2 ads, then it becomes a proximity environment again, and that is basically the idea here. So because I have a breaker that deals proximity break gauge depletion at least, it will eventually break the ads on the sides, and then they will actually die due to my damage from Ren here. By the way, if you have Ren, make sure that she has her Crystallis, which means her EX, which means follow-up attack damage, and then you can either use weak damage, or you can use attack percent, or you can use elemental damage. Any of that will work as well, but that's basically the setup for this. Now there's another wrench that the boss is going to try and throw at you, and this wrench is that the boss will sometimes buff itself with a defense up, which means that you can't really break the boss during the defense up, although yes you can, but you deal a lot less damage, and that kind of sucks. So you're basically wasting a break if you break the boss during a defense up. You can have someone dispel the buff, but you don't really have many spaces left on your roster to use someone who can get rid of buffs. You might not have a free space for that, which means you might have to wait for the defense up buff to just go away. And you can't really wait that much because you're trying to hit the boss 30 times, you're trying to hit the ads on the sides, you're trying to kill the ads on the side eventually, so that when more ads come in, they can move to the center. You don't really have much time to be waiting for a defense buff to run out, but you can't really not wait because you have to keep going with the fight at some point. So for the most part, I do actually just wait it out. For the most part, I do actually say, okay, I'm just going to wait it out. I'm just going to wait 1 or 2 turns until the defense buff is gone, and then I'm going to break it. It does make the fight more difficult, but you'll just have to eat that difficulty increase, and you'll just have to somehow deal with it. You can theoretically break the boss while it has the defense up. You'll do some damage still. It's not 0 damage. You'll still deal some damage, but it will make the fight a bit longer, and the longer the fight goes, the higher the chance that at some point it falls apart. But also keep in mind, as long as you can keep hitting the ads on the sides 15 times, you probably won't take much damage. Like, this fight has been going on for a really long time already, and my guys are still full HP, even though I only have a bad defender on the team. Like an A0 defender without Crystallis. And everyone's still basically full HP, because they don't do anything if they always are at 15 stacks the ads before they do their attack. They don't do anything. So if you can keep all the ads at 15 stacks all the time, then you can totally just play this fight for basically ever. Like, for basically ever you can play this fight, and it's not much is going to happen. So you can actually play this fight a little bit slower. That said, you probably still want to use speed buffers, because like I said, it's easier to get more hits on the boss and on the ads within every 2 of their turns if you have more speed. And by doing that, yes, if you have more speed, like a Momura, like a Rico, like a Rika might take too much damage, by the way, because she's off element, like a Mummy, or if you saw the boss with Kirika, for example, those are ways of making sure that you get more turns over the boss and over the enemies and keep hitting the enemies. And if you just have more follow-up attacks instead, if you have more follow-up attacks, more AoE damage, if you bring, for example, an Ashley, for example, she doesn't get that many follow-up attacks here, but sometimes she does, and that might still help. So yeah, there are ways of hitting the boss more often that you might not need a speed buffer, but generally the goal is hit all the enemies at least 15 times every 2 turns and hit the boss at least 30 times every 3 of the boss's turns. That is your goal here. If you can do that, if you can hit the enemies that often, you just win. It's gonna be a long fight, but you will eventually just win. And generally some great characters you can use here are Ren, Madoka, Swim Mummy, Pluvia, Alina, Iroha, Mummy A2 specifically, although lower than A2 also works, Momura, Mabayu for more turns, Kirika, and Sayaka. Good luck. Okay, these next 2 ones are absolute jokes. For some reason, I guess the developers realized that the tower so far has gotten really difficult, so they decided to just throw a bone to everyone and make tower 45, 54, and 55 extremely easy compared to everything that came before. So every single one of these enemies deals damage based on their defense, meaning if you reduce their defense, it massively reduces the amount of damage they do, which means theoretically, yes, you can just run 5 debuffers that all debuff defense, and the enemy does about 50 damage. I'm not even joking, the enemy does like 50 damage if you have 5 debuffers that debuff defense on the enemy. Just absolutely nothing, just absolutely trivial. That's the first thing. Secondly, there is at least some special mechanic to these fights. You have an enemy here in the center. You see it has a magic bar that says 1 out of 1. It's kind of weird, but the way this works is it says it will do a special attack if it doesn't take damage over time from something. But if it does take damage over time from something, then instead of using its special attack, it does a weak attack. And this special attack this ad does is it's wounding your entire team, which is bad because the enemy gets stronger if you have wounded characters. So we don't want to be wounded, so we want to have a damage over time effect active on the center ad at all times, because then when the turn of that ad starts, it takes damage over time, and therefore will not use its big special attack. It will use its other attack, which does basically no damage, just a very low poke at you. So that's the one mechanic in this fight. You want to have a damage over time effect active on the center dude at all times. Next up, generally there's going to be enemies on the sides that are going to be trying to apply wound to your team, and then they will do more damage to you if you have wound on you. So in this case, I brought a Rera who I gave the MP% portrait, because with the MP% portrait, you only need to use two skills, and she has special. So you can always just use 2 skills, special, and the special from Rera dispels all of the wounds there are on your team. And together with Kokoro, you have 2 sustains that actually make sure you don't take much damage, because they can barely break through Kokoro's shields with just a single 5-star debuffer. Like, Tsukasa could be any 5-star debuffer, could be Felicia, could be Ren, once again Ren dunks on this, could be Swim Saika, for example, could be Nemu, for example. Any 5-star debuffer that debuffs defense will make the enemy's damage go down by so much that even a Reira plus Kokoro, who are both off element, can still keep the entire party alive. But I'm using Reira specifically because Reira's special can get rid of wounds. So if the enemy somehow applies multiple wounds to my party, Reira can immediately get rid of all those wounds while also healing a little bit, and that's very helpful. Hana is here, even though she's probably the worst character, like the worst 4-star character in the game, because she just does a damage over time ailment, and because the enemy is weak to dark, that means the enemy is weak to curse. So curse basically gonna hit every single time, so you can just hit with a curse on the center and just keep it on there. But make sure not to actually use Hana's special unless you know what you're doing, because Hana's special removes her curse, but it also deals damage over time. So removing the curse actually deals damage over time from her special, so it will stop the ad from using its special attack for the next turn, but you then still have to reapply the ailment for the turn after that, so keep that in mind. It's probably not worth it to accidentally run into a situation where the enemy doesn't have a damage over time ailment on it. But yeah, this team can survive forever, even though it's a completely low rarity team, except for Tsukasa. But like I said, Tsukasa could be any 5-star debuffer, could even be a Felicia, because Felicia's special reduces defense on all enemies. It might take a few MP points to get there, because she needs to use her skill multiple times to get the MP for her special, compared to other debuffers. Like I think even Nemu, who does it on her skill. But basically, any 5-star debuffer does it here. There is theoretically also the ability to use Ayame, because Ayame reduces defense on skill to every enemy, but it's only a little bit of defense, and she's off element, which means she takes a lot of damage, and it's not actually that easy to do with that. But generally, this type of team, even though it looks ridiculous, actually just wins. Actually, it takes like 50 rounds, but this team wins. I'm not going to show you the entire 50 rounds right here, but yeah, it does eventually win. But yeah, just generally, just reduce enemy defense and they can't do shit. If you reduce their defense and keep an ailment on the center target, they're cooked. They're done. Can't do anything. But yeah, generally characters for this are Holy Mami, Swim Sayaka, Homura, Mito, Pluvia, Tsukuyo, Ren, Tsukasa, Nemu, Felicia, Hana, and Reira. They work pretty well here. And now we come to the final one, 55. So this one, basically everything that I've just said is still true, with keeping an ailment on the center target and debuffing their defense as much as possible. So a similar strategy works here, although you need to use a little bit more damage, maybe a little bit more gusto, a little bit more gas in the tank for this. So what is happening in this fight? So I said the general strategy is the same, but the way the strategy works is slightly different. So you have the center left and the center right ads. They're going to try and do their special attacks, and like I said, their special attacks are going to be different if they take damage over time. Now, in the fight before this, the special attack they were trying to use was they were trying to use a wound on your entire team. I think in this case, they're not going to put wound on your team if they don't take damage over time. They will put a action advance on the boss if they don't take damage over time. So in this case, instead of a Hana, I used a Nemu, because Nemu also reduces defense, so you get a 2-in-1 deal, and I just kind of wanted to do that. So you can apply poison to both of the sides right here, so they don't do their special attack, they only do a little bit of a poke, doesn't do much. Then you have the ads on the far left and on the far right. They are going to do MP reduction to your entire team, and they're going to reduce MP by more the less debuffs they have. Meaning, if you give a ton of debuffs onto the ads on the very left and very right, they do basically 0 MP reduction, and they do basically nothing. At the same time, you also have the boss in the center. The boss in the center is stacking up magic stacks, as you can see. And these magic stacks give the boss more defense. And the boss's attacks scale off of defense, meaning the boss does more damage the more stacks it has. And the way to combat this is that every time the boss takes damage over time from any damage over time source, it loses a stack. And at the beginning of the fight, for the first 10 of the boss's turns, it gains 2 stacks per turn. So let's say for example right here, the boss is going to take a turn, it has a poison effect on it, it gains 2 stacks, takes poison damage, and 1 stack is reduced, so it still gains 1 stack. So it will still, even with just 1 damage over time effect on it, it will still slowly gain stacks. One thing to note is if there are multiple types of damage over time, like let's say for example a poison and a curse, still only counts as 1 tick of damage over time damage. Does not count as 2, sadly. So over time the boss will still slowly gain more stacks, and eventually this will actually kill us. So this is still not actually a trivial fight. So one way of dealing with the boss gaining more stacks is to do more damage over time. But how can we do more damage over time if it only deals damage on the boss's turn? Well, there are characters that can explode damage over time effects and instantly deal their damage. One of them is Nemu, which is why she's the perfect pick for this. But another one is Hana, and Hana is a 4-star character, by the way, so everyone has her. And she can explode her curse, and then she has to reapply her curse, sadly, so make sure you do that. And that is one way of dealing more ticks of damage over time. Swimsuit Sayaka can also do that because Swimsuit Sayaka's vortexes count as damage over time, and you can pop multiple at once, meaning you can do multiple instances of damage over time effect very quickly, and that helps out a lot. But for right now, we're just going to keep a damage over time effect on the boss. We're going to keep a damage over time effect on the 2 adds to the left and the right of the boss. And then we're just slowly going to kill the adds on the very left, and we're going to kill the adds on the very right because they reduce our MP, and we don't like that. We also need to kill all the adds, because if we don't kill all the adds, the boss takes a very high amount of reduced break gauge depletion, so we can't actually kill the boss until the adds are defeated, so we do need to defeat the adds eventually. But you can see right here, I'm mostly just keeping the damage over time effects on there. I'm popping some right here to get the stacks a little bit more under control, and then I'm just whittling away at the adds on the far left and on the far right to eventually kill them so they don't reduce my MP, and then it becomes easier to kill the other 2 adds that are left, and then I can kill the boss. Now towards the end of this fight, if you don't have anyone that pops ailments and the boss gets to high stacks, it can get really difficult to survive the boss's attacks. But if you have a really strong defender, or if you just have a good team that deals high amounts of damage and breaks very fast, you can probably just end this fight before the boss gets many stacks, because this team doesn't do much damage. And even though this is a rather low damage team, it still kills the boss before it gets too many stacks, simply because I can keep the boss's stacks under control. But with a high damage team, you don't have to worry about the boss stacks too much. Just keep at least 1 ailment on the boss at all times and on the adds, and the boss will take a really long time to actually kill your team, and you can probably just win the fight before then. So generally that's the idea here. Some characters that are generally pretty good here are Yachio, are Homura, are Holimami, Tsukuyo, Mito, Pluvia, Ren, Tsukasa, Felicia, Nemu, Swim Sayaka, Hana, Ayame, Sayaka, and Kirika. All pretty good for this. Now you might have looked at this fight, and something I said earlier is that what if you just had 5 debuffers? And yeah, here's what happens if you have 5 debuffs. I'm going to show you right here. They're going to have 5 debuffers. They're all going to apply their debuffs to the enemy. And once the enemy has 5 debuffs, or has the debuffers from all my 5 debuffers, the adds are gonna do, the enemies are gonna do basically no damage at all. And it's gonna be really, really sad for the enemy that they can't do anything. So let's see, they do MP down, does nothing. They do MP down, does nothing. Oh man, that's kind of sad. L in chat for the adds that can't do anything, really, really sad. So I must do a lot of damage to them. But here they go. More MP down, doesn't do anything. Oh man, that's really sad. Boss attacks, that's a lot of damage. But yeah, the adds are dead and you can't do anything. I think I've shot somewhere of the add dealing damage to me. Because the add also does basically no damage to me here. The add, I think, is trying to damage me and it does like 50 damage or something. Let's see. Ooh, that's kind of sad right there. That's kind of sad. Ooh, man. That add has seen better days. And yeah, the boss itself, with the super duper big mega attack, does like 1000 damage. And that's it. And then the boss dies. So yeah, it's very easily exploitable that the enemy's damage scales off of defense. Because once their defense is down, they don't really do anything. So yeah, that's that. But yeah, that was my guide for all of you tower levels. I hope I was able to help you in some way or another. Hit that subscribe button, become a member today, and shout outs to my current members already, Lip, Thumbwinkle, and Simpletor. Thank you very much. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you guys next time.